I'm going to go through a little bit of a story for you because I'm not your typical hire for General Motors, and I want to tell you a little bit of background which sort of talks about the sort of not just evolution that we're facing in transportation, but really a revolution and what we're trying to do about that. So, you know, myself, I'm probably one of the very few people in General Motors with a philosophy degree. I graduated 25 years ago in 1992, so about 26, 27 years ago now. And of course, at that time, it wasn't like I had a lot of recruiters on campus looking for a corporate epistemologist. So I decided that I was going to be an entrepreneur. I was going to publish Canada's very first volleyball magazine of all things. And I was going to take advantage of the disruption in magazine publishing. So if any of you remember this time in the early 90s when Macs came out, there was software out there that a kid like me of 21 years old could go out and start a magazine in the face of the McLean Hunters and Sothams and Rogers out there. I could build this magazine, and it ended up being a circulation of 100,000 across the country. I went to 3 Olympic Games as a journalist, and it was a fantastic opportunity to bring together creative people, advertising salespeople, editorial, and it actually led me onto a path that I still follow today, which is around curiosity and solving interesting problems. So speaking of interesting problems, I ended up taking that volleyball magazine and using it to get into the MBA program at Queen's. They had a special allocation for what they called the poets in the MBA program. And so I had to take remedial accounting, but eventually I actually ended up getting my MBA and joined the world of management consulting. I joined McKinsey & Company as an experienced hire and worked on cases like the FBI. Now, I'm allowed to talk about the FBI because they went on the congressional record to say we had hired McKinsey to be able to bridge the gap between the intelligence division and the criminal division. And if you know anything about the collaboration amongst these two groups, that was the failing in 9/11, is they each had pieces of information that they didn't share with one another. Now, I'm sure you never see that in organizations like yours. But it was important to think about collaboration in large companies. Actually, even in some growing companies have this difficulty of sharing information. I actually use this desire for curiosity to actually take me into my next sideline. This is a picture of me from 2004. I was in my second rock, paper, scissors world championship. I finished in the top 10 in the first year out of 500 people. Second year, I finished 7th out of 500 in that second year. So I'm here to tell you that there's actually a way of adding some strategy to intangibles. You've actually had some great speakers talking about AI and all this data. I was doing that playing rock, paper, scissors, and I'm happy to play you at the break, but this is meant to illustrate you that we're moving into a world where more and more we're actually looking at all of these things that had been very much seen as luck or intangibles, and we're trying to add a little bit more rigor to it. So a couple of years ago, I worked for a firm started by these esteemed gentlemen. McDonald and Curry had actually started their accounting firm here in Montreal. I think it was in the early, around 1908. And they built this firm up into Coopers and Lybrand and later into PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I was their innovation leader. And it was a great title. It was an opportunity to sort of take ideas to invoices. And I loved this opportunity. And I was like, well, I'm an innovation leader. You know, what am I going to do to distinguish myself? So I thought I would drive drunk people around downtown Toronto. So let me back up a second to explain what was happening. So I was really trying to look for those employee ideas that, not my own ideas, but could I take some of those Post-it notes that people have, these tricks, these tips, could I make them into new businesses, new lines of services? Because PwC was also under a lot of pressure. You can imagine it's many long-standing industries that are facing this very statement that Mark Andreessen talked about. In the Netherlands, we don't do any personal income taxes. That actually happens automatically. You actually get a text message that says, thank you for filing your income taxes, because they know all the information. So what does that mean for a 100-year-old plus firm in terms of looking at disruption? Well, they needed to look at what was happening outside of their world. What other regulated industries were being challenged? You've seen what's happened in the hotel industry and how Airbnb is challenging them. This is a comment on Twitter from a number of years ago about Marriott adding 30,000 rooms. And he was jokingly referring, well, we're going to do that in about 2 weeks. And if any of you remember what happened when Cuba opened up its market, Airbnb was able to turn on this asset without really needing to own any assets in that economy. So in my case, I wanted to look at another regulated industry that was changing and to see what PwC could learn. Because I think this is very telling in terms of what's going on in transportation as well. So in September 2014, I became one of the very first UberX drivers in Toronto and in the whole country of Canada. This is my actual driver photo. I'm very proud of my 4.9 driver rating. I understand now that my telematics and my phone is actually telling you about my driving behavior, so it's interesting to see that revolution. But I didn't do this just once or twice. I actually did it once a month over about 14 months as I was using my journalistic sensibility to take notes and say, what was happening here? What's happening on the supply side? How are regulators reacting to this? So I was at the same time involved with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce at looking at the rules around the sharing economy and what was going to happen to how we regulate this. Now, it was interestingly for me to be on the front lines of this and seeing what happens to drivers in the sharing economy. I don't know if any of you remember pictures like this being sent out to insurance agencies. People like me would drive up to maybe near a taxi stand and they would see somebody get out of my back seat and nobody in my front seat. And immediately a taxi driver would appear at my driver's side window, knock on the window and say, what the hell are you doing? Except they use much stronger language than that. And one of the things that we saw often was people would take a picture of my license plate and they would send it around to as many insurance companies or the insurance bureau thinking that Ted Graham's insurance would be delisted. Well, I'll tell you what happened. As I started writing articles about this, I appeared on CBC Metro Morning, I was writing in the Globe. All of a sudden, I was being invited to actually various insurance company boardrooms to talk about the sharing economy and what products could be used to actually satisfy the customers and the drivers. And it wasn't long after that you guys were forward enough to actually be the very first to look at a product in this marketplace. So I feel like we've sort of gone through this journey together, but I didn't really stop there. I started looking at, what are all of these other companies that are looking to disrupt their various industries? Anybody want to venture a guess how many Uber-ofs there was out there when we looked at it? I'll give you an example of a few. Maybe you're familiar with the Uber of private jets, or in Canada, the Uber of snow plowing. In General Motors, we can't get away with branding like that, but this is, by the way, one of the 500 in 2014. This was License to Cure. This was one of 5 Uber of marijuana delivery services that we found that year. And so I ended up writing a book called The Uber of Everything, which was looking at all of this disruption and seeing how it was going to affect regulated businesses. And lo and behold, General Motors came calling. And at first, the recruiter said, we'd be interested in talking to you about your insights on the sharing economy and what you think about where our business model is going. And I said, well, to be frank, I don't know what a carburetor is. And they said, it's okay, we don't use carburetors anymore. But one of the things that was probably most exciting for me was that they had a new female CEO at the helm, and somebody who had looked at our relationship with customers much, much differently. And Mary Barra was really sort of that essential reason that convinced me that it was worth taking a chance. Somebody like me with a philosophy degree was going to join General Motors and have an impact. So I've been going on this journey about how do we partner effectively My title as head of open innovation means I work with startups, I work with incubators, I work with academics, and I work with sometimes other large corporations. Chris and I, who'll talk in a second, will talk a little bit about what collaboration looks like in our world. But one of the things that's been really important is having a vision that I can communicate to entrepreneurs, to professors, to young students, that is compelling to them to want to partner with us. And so when we recently articulated this idea of zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion, you don't see anything in there about maximizing units sold. And I actually think that we're going into a future where we're going to be measuring kilometers enjoyed as opposed to units sold. So I want to give you a little bit of a picture of some of the sort of 4 key areas. And maybe many of you have heard these sort of categories. Sometimes they're referred to as ACEs: autonomous, connected, electrified, shared. So we think we've got one in each of these categories that is very important to where the transportation industry is evolving to. So on the electric side, of course, we have the Chevy Bolt, which was the car of the year last year. Now, we had a little bit of a window before the Tesla Model 3 was rolled out. Turned out to be somewhat of a longer window because of production schedules, but I give it to Elon Musk for actually making electric vehicles a thing of desire. But it's been great for us in terms of where we're going to go after the Chevy Bolt. We've actually announced that by 2021, we expect to have something like 20 models of electric vehicles. And we are on path to get the cost for the electric battery underneath the car to be at a point where we can be profitable with each and every one of those models. The next point is this idea of the connected car and things like 4G, LTE, Wi-Fi in the vehicle. And I want to ask you a question, and maybe you've talked to, if you've got teenagers at home, about whether they're going to get their driver's license or not, which, growing up in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, was never a question, but we put it to a few 16-year-olds a couple years ago. We said, would you rather give up Wi-Fi or your driver's license? What do you think they said? It's a huge shift, a massive shift. And many of us maybe in this room can't imagine making that decision. But it is in the sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, it's basically everything. It's taken over the whole pyramid. And then I want to touch on Maven, and then I'll go back to autonomous and cruise for a second. So on the shared side, Maven has been around for a couple of years now, and you probably have seen it in its sort of, its typical incarnation has been sort of a, we rent from one point and you return it back to that point. But just recently, we actually combined the OnStar system to be able to do peer-to-peer car sharing. So anybody who has a General Motors car, 2015 and newer, are able to actually put their vehicle into the pool of cars that can be rented, much like the style of Turo, but we're actually relying a little bit on that technology now to actually ensure what's happening with that car. Can we ensure the safety, anything that happens to it through all of our IoT devices on there. Now, it's only in about 5 markets right now in the United States, but we do think that this is a space to watch, and I think this is something very important for us to continue to look at and collaborate on. You'll actually see future announcements from Maven, because it will be more than just car sharing. It will go into all forms of urban mobility. So last, let me talk to you a little bit about Cruise. So one of the things that actually, when I was doing my due diligence before I joined GM, they had just done the Cruise deal. This was I think there was something like 24 engineers in San Francisco. Kyle Vogt, the CEO and founder of Cruise, had previously, his company was about live streaming video gamers on a platform called Twitch that he sold to Amazon. And we went to Kyle and we said, what if we could combine our regulatory knowledge, our ability to manufacture at scale, with your speed of innovation and insight into robotics and building this quickly and efficiently? We will give you the autonomy to build this, but we need to partner together to actually, as an existential case for General Motors. Now, just recently, we've been able to get an investment from SoftBank of $2.3 billion to actually create a new entity, GM Cruise, to go into the robo-taxi market. This will very much be our business model for how we operate this. This isn't about personally owned autonomous. It may happen in the future, but right now we believe that it's a robo-taxi in dense urban environments. And I just want to give you a little bit of a flavor of what this looks like. So this is one of our Chevy Bolts, our electric vehicles, because we believe that all of our AVs should be EVs. And it's navigating the streets of San Francisco. Now, anybody have driven in San Francisco? It's difficult at the best of times. And so I was in one of these cars last October. I'll be in another one next month. And finding various things like, I had a car actually stop in a moving lane of traffic in front of me. He took out 2 pylons from his back seat and put one in the back and one in the front, and he created a parking spot for himself. I'm not sure how you program the car to understand that, but it's really important in my sort of world of curiosity that you actually go out and you understand what's happening here and you try to experience these things. So I want to get back a little bit to sort of the transition that we're going through, and I think maybe the transition that you're going through as well. This is a picture of Colonel Sam McLaughlin, who started his Carriage Works company back in sort of early 1900. We actually, as General Motors, bought the McLaughlin Carriage Works, and it became General Motors of Canada. So we've actually been in this country for a number of years. And it was very interesting to go through the archives of when Colonel Sam first started talking about the disruption he was facing. This was a letter that he had sent to his carriage dealers, explaining why they were getting out of the horse and carriage trade and what was happening to the business model to shift them to this new reality. So this won't be the first time that we face a disruption, and won't be the last time. But I hope you join me and face this disruption hands-on. And whether we take the wheel in our hands or we sit and we enjoy the kilometers in our back seat, I hope you enjoy me on the ride. Thank you.